Before you watch this video, I recommend that you go and watch my other video first. It is called The True Sabbath Shabbat Day, Part 1. This is so that you will understand how we came to our conclusion on when Yeshua was resurrected. In Mark chapter 14, verse 13 through 16, and Luke chapter 22, verse 7 through 8, Yeshua sent 2 disciples to go into the city to prepare for them to eat the Passover. He became their Passover lamb and the unleavened bread that night of the 14th, when they ate the Passover meal and the unleavened bread. Luke chapter 22, verse 17 through 20. After taking the cup, he gave thanks and said, "Take this and divide it among you. For I tell you, I will not drink again from the fruit of the vine until the kingdom of God comes." And he took the bread, gave thanks and broke it, and gave it to them, saying, "This is my body given for you. Do this in remembrance of me." In the same way, after the supper, he took the cup, saying, "This cup is the renewed covenant in my blood, which is poured out for you." At that moment, Yeshua made a renewed covenant with them when they drank the wine to become his bride. Since Yeshua symbolically became their Passover lamb that saved them that night on the 14th, he then became the sacrificial lamb for burnt offerings and sin offerings on the 15th that is poured out for them, cleansing them from their sins and also sealing the covenant with them when he was crucified. Usually sacrifices are done after a covenant was made and sealed once God has accepted it. For example, the covenant with Abram in Genesis chapter 15, 1 through 19, and other places in the Bible. Yeshua became the final sacrificial lamb once and for all, as explained in Hebrews chapter 10, verse 1 through 18. He did away with the first in order to establish the second covenant that God said in Jeremiah 31, verse 30 through 33. Jeremiah chapter 31, verse 30 through 33. "Here the days are coming, says Adonai, when I will make a renewed covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Yehuda. It would not be like the covenant I made with their fathers on that day. I took them by their hand and brought them out of the land of Egypt, because they, for their part, violated my covenant, even though I, for my part, was a husband to them, says Adonai. For this is the covenant I will make with the house of Israel after those days, says Adonai. I will put my Torah within them and write it on their hearts. I will be their God and they will be my people. No longer will any of them teach his fellow community member or his brother, 'Know Adonai,' for all will know me, from the least of them to the greatest, because I will forgive their wickedness and remember their sins no more." Yeshua said that he would come to be the final sacrifice in Psalm 40, 7 through 8. "Sacrifices and grain offerings you don't want. Burnt offerings and sin offerings you don't demand. Instead, you have given me open ears. So then I said, 'Here I am coming. In the scroll of the book it is written about me.'" Even John the Baptist said in John chapter 1:29, Yochanan saw Yeshua coming toward him and said, "Look, God's Lamb, the one who is taking away the sin of the world." Sacrifices for the burnt offerings and sin offerings has to do with sacrifices that would atone and cleanse them from their sins. But Passover sacrifice is not for cleansing of sins. It is done to mark all those that belong to God, and God would spare them. Just as Yeshua marked the disciples as his own when they drank the blood of the covenant of the wine that was given that night on the 14th, and they became his bride, and they were spared, and all those as well that partake of this wine of the blood covenant. Now, to put this in perspective, on the 14th, Yeshua was symbolically their Passover, marking them with the blood covenant that they drank so that God would pass over them and spare them. Yeshua symbolically became their Passover, as it is written in 1 Corinthians chapter 5, 7. Our Passover is the Messiah. who was slain for our sake. On the 15th, Yeshua was sacrificed as burnt offerings and sin offerings. They required a male lamb to be sacrificed to atone and cleanse those that have sinned against God. This is why the sacrifice from the Passover could not be left over for the 15th. Because on the 15th, God required a different kind of sacrifice, and that is the sacrificial burnt offerings. And Yeshua was that sacrificial burnt offerings and sin offerings that God had accepted, which sealed the covenant that Yeshua made the night before to bring in those who partake of the blood covenant. Yeshua was the final sacrificial lamb, the perfect sacrifice that was slain that God accepted, as mentioned in Hebrews chapter 10, 1 through 18, and Psalms 40, verse 6 through 8, which he fulfilled on the 15th according to God's calendar. At that time it would be the 14th, the preparation day, according to the Jewish calendar, as mentioned in John chapter 19, verse 42, because they were using a different calendar than Yeshua. Even though the Pharisees and Sadducees thought they were following Torah correctly, it was because of their man-made traditions that had caused them to err on the calendar and became a day later than Yeshua and his disciples. Now, after Yeshua was arrested, they had a trial all night, and early in the morning they took Yeshua to the governor's headquarters. They did not enter the headquarters building because they didn't want to become ritually defiled, and thus unable to eat the Pesach, the Passover meal. As we can see here in this verse, that they had not yet had their Passover meal. In Mark chapter 15, verse 42, it was preparation day. That is the day before the high Sabbath. Mark was referring to the Judean calendar. As we know now that they are a day late, so they actually sacrificed Yeshua on the high holy day according to God's calendar. But for them, it won't be until the next day. Also in Luke chapter 23, verse 54, it was preparation day, and the Sabbath was about to begin. John chapter 19, verse 42, referring to it as the preparation day for the Judeans. So because it was preparation day for the Judeans, and because the tomb was close by, that is where they buried Yeshua. As we can see here is proof that the Judeans were using a different calendar because it was preparation day for the Judeans. This is why Yeshua and the disciples celebrated Passover and eating unleavened bread the night before the Judeans were, because Yeshua was using the correct calendar and following Torah. So he was sacrificed according to God's calendar on the 15th, a high holy day, the first day of the festival of unleavened bread, and it was the 14th according to the Judeans' calendar. Now to find out when Yeshua was resurrected, we will have to subtract 3 days and 3 nights from when he resurrected. Now according to how I showed you to count the correct days from morning to evening and then morning again, but here we have to count backwards to find out. Saturday night, Friday night, Thursday night. Here are 3 nights. Now subtract 3 days. Saturday, Friday, Thursday. We know that Yeshua was crucified in the 9th hour, which would be around 3 p.m., and then placed in the tomb by twilight. As we learn that it is still part of that day, and it don't have to be the full 12 hours in the day. The ladies bought spices and prepared them and rested for the high Sabbath Friday, according to the Judean calendar, and the weekly Sabbath Saturday, according to the commandments of God. Saturday night was over, and therefore ending the Sabbath. So they left for the tomb while it was still dark, when it was dawning on the first day of the week. When they got to the tomb, they saw 2 angels inside the tomb, and the angels told them that Yeshua had already resurrected. Now to recap, our Messiah Yeshua was placed in the tomb by twilight, on Thursday, therefore fulfilling the sign of Jonah 3 days and 3 nights. From Thursday and Thursday night, Friday and Friday night, Saturday and Saturday night. It was about to dawn, then the Sabbath was coming to a close, and the next day, the first day of the week, and the feast of first fruits was also about to begin, as we can see in Matthew 28, 1 through 10, Mark 16, 1 through 5, Luke 24, 1 through 8, and John 20, 1 through 10. So Yeshua rose just as it was dawning, and they were fulfilling what Yeshua said, that he is the Lord of the Sabbath, Shabbat, in Matthew chapter 12, 8, and Luke 6, 5. And he is the first fruits. 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 20 through 23. But the fact is that the Messiah has been raised from the dead, the first fruits of those who have died. For since death came through man, also the resurrection of the dead has come through a man. For just as in connection with Adam all die, so in connection with the Messiah all will be made alive, but each in his own order. The Messiah is the first fruits, then those who belong to the Messiah at the time of his coming. As you can see, if you count the days from morning to evening, and then morning again, to end the previous day and to begin the new day, it shows that it fits the accounts of the apostles' writings when Yeshua resurrected. As you can see that Yeshua fulfilled the prophecy as the final burnt and sin offering sacrifice in Psalms chapter 40, verse 7 through 8. Let's finish off with Hebrews chapter 10, verse 1 through 18. For the written law had a shadow in it of good things that were coming. It was not the essence of those matters. Because of this, while they were offering those sacrifices every year, they could never perfect those who offered them. For if they had perfected them, doubtless they would have ceased from their offerings, because their conscience would not have been buffeted by sin once they had themselves been purged. But by those sacrifices they remember their sins every year. For the blood of oxen and of yearling goats cannot purge sins. Because of this, when he entered the universe, he said, Sacrifice and offerings you did not want, but you have clothed me with a body. And burnt peace offerings for sins you have not demanded. And I said, Behold, I come, because in the beginning of the writings it is written of me, to do your will, O God. Above, he said, sacrifices and offerings, and burnt peace offerings for sins you did not want. Those that were offered were by the written law. And afterward he said, Behold, I have come to do your will, O God. In this he sets aside the first to establish the second. For in this, his will, we are made holy in the offering of the body of Yeshua the Messiah, once and for all. For every high priest who has stood and served those with those sacrifices every day was offering those things which were never able to purge sins. But this one offered one sacrifice for the sake of sins, and he sat down at the right hand of God for eternity, and he waits from then on until his enemies are put as a footstool under his feet. For by one offering he has perfected those who are sanctified by him for eternity. But the Spirit of holiness also testifies to us, who says, This covenant that I shall give them after those days, says the Lord, I shall put in my law into their minds, and I shall write it upon their hearts. And their evils and their sins I shall remember no more. But where there is forgiveness of sins, no offering for sins is needed. Thank you for watching. Please like and share this video so that the truth may go out to the nations. May the glory be to our Messiah Yeshua and to our Father and Creator Adonai Yahweh, forever and ever. Amen.